All right, welcome back to another episode of Alaka'i, the podcast. I'm your host, Eli Hadley, and I'm joined by my fellow co-host, Mutia. How you doing, Mutia?
I'm doing good, Eli. Thank you so much for asking. I'm so excited today.
I'm excited too. And I was really thinking today, Mutia, because as college students, right, we're in a different environment, right? And it makes one think about their family. What do you miss
True.
most about your family?
About my family, I miss a dinner like every night. So we normally just eat on a really long table because it's 5 of us in the family, and then we're just sharing. It's not only dinner. It's not about the food. It's about the sharing stories that I don't really experience a lot over here. I mean, we do potlucks with friends. We do a lot of things like that, but it's probably like once a week thing. So that's something that I always love about my family. What about you?
I think and I say I miss it now, but maybe I wouldn't miss it if I were right there in the moment, is the chaos, the wild chaos that family can create with, people talking and going off about one story or the other. Or, I always think like if my life or my family's life or any family's life was a TV show, you can't make that stuff up, right? Like you'd have to be like a genius to make that stuff up, the stuff that happens, because it's also random, right? It's amusing, weird, bizarre, but all in all, right? It's just like, that's part of life. It's just one of those things that makes me go like, well, that's life. What can you do?
True.
And, even here too, there's a sense of family, even though I'm far from my family in Delaware. My sister's here. And then her boyfriend, and I went over to paint at their house the other night. We just painted together, the three of us, and watched a reality show. And
Nice.
it was kind of this like mini other family that we were able to have, because my sister and I have our relationship has grown since we were little kids. So it's really cool to see how college family doesn't only include people you are legally bound to as family, but the people you meet, your friends, your neighbors too. And the church especially, right, is family. It's all about family. And on that topic of family, and I feel like Vin Diesel in Fast and Furious, right? I've said the word family like 7 times now. We have our very special guest, Michael Schaumann, here. How you doing, Michael?
Good. Thank you for having me.
Good to have
Michael.
you here.
Wait, a little bit story about it. We worked together before, so we know quite a lot, like working pretty close to each other. So it's nice to have you in a different kind of environment.
Yeah.
And before I know him from work, actually, I had a chance to visit his ward. I didn't even know who he was, but he gave a talk about how he is from Russia and being adopted to a family here in the United States. And I think without knowing who you were, it was a really heartfelt talk for me personally. So we were just talking with Eli, like, okay, who will be a good guest for our podcast this time? So we're thinking, why not we share about the experience of someone who is being adopted to a family? Okay, for those who doesn't know you, Michael, of course, many of the listeners doesn't know you. So just share a little bit about you, and then just whatever you're comfortable with.
Yeah. So, like Mutia said, my name is Michael. I'm from Colorado. I claim Colorado as my home now, as that's where I was adopted to. I'm adopted from Russia. Specifically Kirov, which I believe, sometimes I get this wrong, but I believe it's like southeast of Moscow, Russia. And in fact, there are 2 other of my siblings are adopted from Russia, and as well as 2 biological. And in fact, the 2 biological siblings of mine, they're bookends, which means one of them is the oldest and one of them is the youngest.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so everybody in between them is adopted from Russia. And of all the siblings that are adopted from Russia, none of us are blood related. We were adopted in pairs, so 2 at a time, and we just happened to be in the same orphanage. The first 2 were pretty young. I think I have to remember this. One of them was 3, I want to say, and the other was just like a month-year-old, like a year old. And so he was actually in the hospital just coming out of the hospital. And so my parents were able to kind of work with the hospital and get him out of there. And then my sister, the one that was 3 years old, was in the orphanage. And so those two were adopted first together, and then a couple of years later, me and my sister now were adopted at the same time. I was 8 when I was adopted, and my sister was 7.
Okay.
So, yeah.
So how many of you in total in the family right now?
So there's 8 of us.
Wow,
Yeah.
that's a big family.
Yeah, and we're constantly adding more.
Oh, really?
Yeah, my family, we love to host foreign exchange students.
Mm-hmm.
And so we've hosted, we've hosted from Russia before. We hosted from Spain. Right now we have one from China, sorry, and then as well as Italy. So it seems like it's always growing. It never stops.
Yeah. Whenever there are people coming to the family, how did you feel?
So after we were adopted, in terms of, the family, the immediate family, not the foreign exchange students, there was no more additions. My mom was done. My parents were done. They had enough to deal with, right, on their plate from going forward. But coming home, the plane rides and the train rides from Russia to the U.S., and then finally to Colorado, and then finally to the house, my family's house. It was very different. Learning how to just kind of take everything in was a lot. It took a lot of time. So it was almost like I was the one being added to the family in a way, because my parents were done, right? They were done, have no more kids. So for me, it was like I was being added to the family. In a sense, it was a lot. It was overwhelming. So, I had to deal with, suddenly there's these other kids that apparently are my siblings, right? And within the church, the next steps, right? The normal steps is when you have a child, you're automatically sealed and, baptized later and everything. So we had to go through those steps actually individually. It wasn't just kind of an automatic thing that a lot of church members have in their lives, right? When they're born in the church. And so the process of kind of being added to the family and then added to the church, added to the habits of the gospel, the habits of the family, right? It was all very different. And so it was a lot to take in, and it's still a growing process. So, yeah. There's quite a bit to unpack for sure.
Sure, yeah. I think, well, it's quite interesting because you were adopted when you were 8, so you had something before, but you needed to add something in your life and adjust with a lot of things. What did you remember about your adjustment with the church when you were 8?
Yeah, that's interesting to ask. So before, I was adopted to the family, I lived a very, very different life. It was a daily abuse, whether it was mentally, physically, sexually, whatever it was daily. It was a routine, as you would say, which is not normal, right? It shouldn't be normal. But for me at the time it was. And it was for 8 years.
Yeah. And you didn't know that it was not okay.
Right? It was the normal.
Yeah.
There was no different lifestyle that I could be living. And so when in Russia, in the orphanage, specifically where I was, around 8 years old actually, is when they transfer you to a different orphanage. So at 8, you're all the group, everyone that is old enough to be transferred, gets transferred to an orphanage in which they teach you how to survive, basically, in Russia. And then around,
like
I want to
military?
Sorry?
Like the kids type of military?
So I guess, yeah, I guess you could say it was kind of a, military survival for kids in Russia. I obviously didn't make it that far, so I'm not sure, everything that goes into it. But around the ages of, I believe, 12, 14 to 16, they kind of kick you out. They give you, enough to survive and then kick you out. Kids go from there and often, become alcoholics. They become part of gangs. They become, drug addicts, and do in fact, die off, unfortunately, because, they lived a life that was very different from other people's lives, even around them. And then they have to now live their own lives with everything they've experienced in Russia, right on the streets. Now, I don't know how many kids, made it, kind of maybe grew out of that experience or, were able to kind of overcome the experience. But luckily, I didn't have to get to that point. In fact, we were notified that we were being adopted by my parents, and that they wanted to come see us. And so we had time to kind of get to know them. They actually traveled to Russia for, I want to say, probably a week. I want to say, I'm not quite sure about the time frame, but they had time to travel, and we got time to be with them and get to know them. We read some books. We faked our happiness. We didn't know who the strangers were, these white strangers, right, that were coming, and that were eventually going to offer a whole different life. Yeah. And so fast forward to when I was 16, I was sitting in a sacrament meeting once, and I thought to myself, I have lived half my life now in the church and half my life in Russia. And at that point, I was like, oh my goodness, I've lived totally different lives. Not every person gets that opportunity to, change their lifestyle, because it's often hard, right? And especially with abuse and neglect, it's harder to kind of have that flip of your life. And so when I was thinking about that, thinking that I'd lived half my life in the church, half my life in Russia, I also was thinking, like, of all the blessings, of all the changes, positive changes that have come because I've been adopted. And so, and I don't know if you want to get into that. That's a whole other podcast. Yeah. But there's a lot of good changes that have come because I was adopted, because I joined the church. And I mean, it's not easy, and it wasn't easy, but to have lived a different lifestyle and to have been able to give an opportunity to totally change it, I think really, for me at least, it gives me a whole different perspective on life and what people are and could be facing in their life, and what people could become, right? And that's why I think it's important to just not necessarily, just judge people by their cover, right? People have so much going on, and so taking the time to really get to know them, kind of get to know what makes them happy, what makes them mad. That's something that's okay to get to know, just so you can kind of reveal the story behind it all. So, yeah.
Absolutely. And would you be able to tell us a bit about, like, the kinds of stigma that people who have gone through difficult situations like you're talking about, what kind of, what makes their struggles so difficult?
Yeah, so I guess, so the struggles that make it so difficult, I mean, for the people themselves that are going through it, right, are, just what I've mentioned, is the different kinds of abuse, right, and different kinds of effects of abuse on the brain, right, both mentally and physically. And abuse does not neglect age, if that makes sense. Like, you can be affected at any point of your time, because of other people's choices, unfortunately. And so because of that abuse, because we're talking about children and adoption, children become, insecure.
Yeah.
They have these mental disabilities that form, right? Whether it's depression, anxiety, right? ADHD, whether it's like all these different just mental setbacks for them. And often these mental setbacks are pretty severe because, this is to experience abuse for a specific amount of time. When it becomes that routine, your brain just wants to repress it. Mm-hmm. So the mental disability that forms to kind of cope with all the abuse is going to be pretty severe, to try to repress all those experiences, all the pain. And so for these kids, and myself included, there's a lot of abuse, a lot of different challenges that came because of abuse. And so things like therapy, things like healthy communication, things like learning how to make friends, how to keep relationships, how to talk to people, how to trust people, right? Be vulnerable with people. All of that has to somehow be integrated into the child's life. And so I don't know, there's a lot there's a lot to talk about that could be talked about, and I would say that's a lot of what the child experiences, and so the stigma that comes from people observing that, right, is they're going to be hard to handle. We can't do this. We can't deal with it. We can't take this child and deal with all their, mental problems and maybe their physical problems or whatever it is. We can't take that into our home. We're not ready for that kind of responsibility. And so, and in reality, a lot of people aren't, because it is really hard. You yourself have to be pretty mentally fit to take on that kind of responsibility, because, this child that's coming into your home, or, whoever it is, has had a total different life than you have possibly. And so you have to be ready for that kind of mental war you're about to have. It takes a lot of strength for sure. And so, and I think another stigma I would say is that there's no hope, which is not true, obviously, right? I'm here.
Yeah, that's right.
Although these kids, they do experience a lot of pain and a lot of, abuse, a lot of heartache in their lives, from an outside perspective, that should make you want to help, right? And unfortunately, what it does is for a lot of people is that they kind of lose hope in those children. They feel bad, right? They feel bad learning about what's happening to them. But at the same time, there's like, okay, so I don't think the child's going to make it, right? Like, I don't think they're going to be able to overcome whatever's going on with them. And so I think that keeps people from adopting and from kind of getting involved and trying to help out. Because they think, well, I can't handle it, who's going to handle it? And is there really any, where are my efforts going into, and is there any really impact, right? And because they see that maybe the kids are, there's no hope for them or something like that.
Yeah, I think talking about a stigma that there is no hope for these kids, it's just I don't see that from you. Like, I see you as a happy person, like at least with your friends. I don't know how you are at home, but anyway, what makes you this happy?
Good question. The funny answer would be repression. But no, I would say my parents did a lot. They put in a lot of effort to try to teach. What once was is not now. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So all the things I went through, that's not how I'm living now, and it's not it's not appropriate to live like that in any way.
Yeah.
And they taught from when I was adopted. They started to teach from that point on, lessons of trust, learning how to trust people, learning how to, feel safe, learning how to communicate with people, learning how to, take on responsibility, learning how to be dependent. A lot of kids that go through abuse and neglect become dangerously independent. And so
Like they don't need someone else.
Exactly. When as people, we need other people.
Right.
Right.
We're social human
We're
beings.
very social, and we need our happiness. Does quite a bit come from other people. There's a certain personal growth we can make that allows us to be happy, but there's also an external happiness that comes from other people. And it's those social interactions, those relationships, whether they're family or friends, right? Because you need people to build you up and cut you down, because that helps you grow and learn how to be happy, right? And if you're overly independent, then you're not going to have that growth. You're not going to have those experiences to become happy. And so my parents really taught those lessons from day one and forward, that this is what a family is, right? This is what real safe, healthy atmosphere looks like. This is what our home represents, right? We give home quite a bit of symbolism and value that in my years in Russia that I did not have. There was no sense of home. There was no sense of value, family, nothing. And so to have home be associated with love, with safety, with vulnerability, with accountability, with responsibility, with trust, right? All these very, very important lessons to learn as a child was I think something that helped me to become happier, learning how to do that. And as well as another big part of that, because it's still difficult to learn all that, right? Those are all good lessons, but to have 8 years of pretty bad influence and impact, it's pretty hard to overcome 8 years. That's a lot of time, for that routine, for that routine of abuse. And so it was a lot of time, and so it took a lot of time as well to learn how to trust people, how to be okay with other people. And so when I came to the age of serving a mission, I was like, okay, why not? I'll do it. And it wasn't until the mission that I truly, I think, felt those lessons. I think you can learn lessons, but then there's a difference between feeling the lessons, right? When you feel trust, right, enough to give it. And so just things like that. And when I went on a mission and served a mission, one of the things, there was one time on P Day that I called my mom and I was like, Mom, I'm becoming way too emotional. Like, why am I caring about so many people? Like, this is weird. This is not normal for me. Like, why do I care about all these strangers? And I think not only is it because, things associated with the mission, but also those lessons that my parents tried to teach me from when I was adopted, that really started hitting me, right? I started feeling those lessons because now on the mission, I am dealing with strangers, right? Who I have to teach the gospel to.
And you have to care of them.
Exactly. And who I have to tell, just so you know, Christ loves you, right? And you can't just tell someone that if you don't feel it. They know, right? They know when you're kind of lying to them or not really not wholeheartedly believing it yourself. And so when I called my mom and said that, I was like, I don't know what this is. Like, this is weird. This is not normal. So it was just a lot of those good lessons that that helped me become happier and learn what happiness is and what it looks like.
Well,
so it was a long answer to get to the point.
Yeah, but no worries about that. But I got a really, really big lesson over here. What you experience in the mission is just like what your parents felt when they adopted you. Because you were really a complete stranger, but they wanted to care of you more. That's why you were added to the family. So I think I've never thought that way when I served a mission. Like, okay, when I care of people, that means I try to put a lot of attention to them and then help them to be in another level of life that will bring hope to their life.
Yeah,
You know what I'm
absolutely.
saying? Yeah. So yeah.
Yeah, what I'm really, a big theme I'm getting from you, Michael, today is, I think so often we look at people and we'll feel pity for them, but that's not what people need. No one wants to be pitied,
they
right?
don't.
Yeah.
Nobody wants someone to think,
I don't want it to.
right? And I think that's a big difference between that and empathy, right? People, they want to be cared about, they want to be cared for, but having pity and being like, oh, how sad, right? And then just moving on with your day, like that's not real love. And I love you've really been exploring that difference between like real love and just kind of like surface level love, or what I would call it, fake love, pity, right? And I think Christ, right, he means for us to go beyond just, oh, well, how sad, anyway. And that reminds me of the Good Samaritan story, right? Certainly the two people who came before the Samaritan had, I guess, quote, pity on the man who fell among thieves, but it wasn't enough to make them actually do something. Mm-hmm. And it was that real love the Samaritan had for the human being that he was supposed to be an enemy with, but having that desire to actually show him love, to help him. And that's the kind of love I think we all need to be showing more and more often, which, I'm reminding myself of that every day. But, pity is not good in its own. It can be a means to some higher form of love, but it's not enough.
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I wanted to know the biggest question. Well, it might not the biggest, but what's something that you're grateful the most?
Good question. I think, the obvious answer, I guess, is I'm grateful for being adopted. Mm-hmm. Right? The change in life. But maybe the not so obvious answer is I'm grateful for, I guess, the process of looking back to what I was, to what I am now, and what I can do going forward.
How does it feel like?
I think it's probably best labeled as reflection, right? Mm-hmm. Just like when I was reflecting about my half life in Russia and half life in America. The process of reflection, it's like, sometimes it's actually like what keeps me in the church, to be honest. Yeah. We all have our own, like, sometimes crisis of faith, and we think about, oh, what if I just leave the church?
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
Right? Like,
I think we all
what am I
came
doing
to
here?
that point.
Yeah.
At least in our heart, if we don't tell someone.
Exactly. It's like, what am I doing here? And then I get reflective, and I think about, okay, if I were to leave the church, what would it look like? What would it mean, right? And then this sudden gratitude for adoption comes in mind. This sudden gratitude for learning, being able to become educated comes in mind. Being grateful for no more abuse, right? Mm-hmm. Being grateful for family, siblings, friends, right? New places to learn from and go to. Learning about all these opportunities of how to serve people. Learning how to, ride a bike, right? Yeah. It's just, there's sometimes it's very simple things that I become reflective of. And that is, I guess, that process of reflection is what I'm grateful for. The ability that we can do that. So that way we can kind of recognize what we were to where we are now, and then what could possibly be in the future.
Right, yeah. For sure. And I think, going off of the gratitude, right? Because gratitude really is, it's the thing that makes life, a little brighter, right? When we sit down, think about what we're grateful for.
Mm-hmm.
For you, we've talked about family a lot, right? And again, think about Fast and Furious. And what, if you were to put it in a couple sentences, what would you say family means for you personally?
Oh, couple sentences.
or more, whatever works for you.
Yeah, I'd say family to me is first of all not giving up. One of the things, Elias, that you mentioned,
Mm-hmm.
is that you don't necessarily have to be immediate family, but you become family.
Mm-hmm.
And I think even with an immediate family, sometimes it doesn't feel like it. And so as you learn how to not give up on each other, then you become a family, right? Whether it is immediate family or whether it's not, or with your friends, right? Then you just become a family. And all those lessons we talked about, trust, vulnerability, comes in mind.
Mm-hmm.
And then they suddenly get solidified as you show gratitude towards each other, as you really learn how to communicate, as you learn how to be more loving towards each other.
Absolutely.
What a quote of the day.
Honestly. Yeah, and we thank you so much for coming on, Michael. I think this is something a lot of people they might not think about it very much throughout the day, but I mean, really, we have a world that's full of, it's full of good things, but also bad things, right? And too often we see suffering, we see people who are apathetic, or sometimes we can be ourselves apathetic. We need to be able to have that strength to love, the strength to look beyond, our own worlds. And so I really appreciate you for coming on and telling us your story so we can be more open to other people's experiences.
Yeah, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And if you see those kids who are suffering the same experience with you in front of you right now, what kind of message you want to tell them?
Geez. Well, first of all, I would have to learn Russian again. Right? But second of all, I would say to keep fighting. Whatever that looks like for you. And sometimes it does look a little bleak or hopeless or even scary.
Mm-hmm.
Just keep fighting. And I would dare say to throw that punch. Sometimes you have to throw the punch in order to keep fighting. And so I would, along with that, keep fighting, is that as long as you keep fighting, you will find the hope that you look for. You'll find that light at the end of the tunnel.
Mm.
And so just keep fighting.
Keep fighting.
Keep fighting. We all need to keep fighting.
Yep.
And in any point of our life.
Absolutely. And I just want to say how grateful we are to Michael for coming on, and just know that out there are people who will be there to help you, that are there to, whether they're biological family or the family you find along the way. Family, I mean, I think that's one of the greatest things about the gospel, right? Family is not just the people who you're related to, but it's those around us. And the church as a whole is a family. And if we are all able to treat others like family, the way the Samaritan treated the man who was robbed, then we can, I think we have hope of a better world. So.
Right, totally.
But thank you so much, Michael.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
For sure. And thank you to all our listeners. We will hope this finds you well, and we'll see you next week.
Mahalo.
Mahalo.
Mahalo.